Hello everyone, we're live now.
Perfect. So thank you everyone for a great session today so far. We have had so many interesting discussions on diverse topics, but all related to how to secure your perimeter effectively in an era where perimeters are becoming really blurry. So just a quick introduction to my panelists before we begin. So of course we have Nikolai Soling, the Chief Technology Officer of Help AG. We have Muad from Fortinet, who had, I think, one of the most interesting titles in terms of his presentations. And we have Anderson from Keysight, who did give us a lot of Keysight into the visibility and Hawkeye. And we have Rabi from Vectra, who definitely has the AI wagon in him, and it has been a really interesting session to hear from him. And we had Roland before, who now all of you can see. We could not see him in his own session, but now the surprise is here. You can see Roland from CrowdStrike with the cloud delivered endpoint security messaging. And last but not the least, the session that we just had, a very, very interesting session around threat intelligence from none other than Jamie from FireEye Mandiant. And I think the entire day has been such a good brainstorming of different ideas and the kind of things we have discussed. It just shows the limitless possibilities that we still have. I mean, now that the perimeters are disappearing, I believe the limits are also disappearing. So there's nothing that we can't do. So I'll stop sharing the screen and let us begin a discussion. So my first question will be to Roland in this way. So in terms of endpoint security, so I believe if it was 7 or 8 years before this, when CrowdStrike was one of the first vendors who talked about endpoint security on the cloud. At that time, it might have seemed like a risky decision. Definitely not anymore. So what do you have to say about this part?
Thank you for this brilliant question, Sumya. So you're right. It was a very bold decision. However, I think it stems from a few factors that were built into this decision. First one was being frictionless, because the traditional process of building signature engines, building management consoles individually for customers was no longer working. We've seen like the tremendous growth in the attacks, and we've seen that speed of deployment and speed of distribution of IOCs, of indicators of attack was critical if you wanted to provide a next-gen platform that can serve into like big data analytics, speed of protection and detection. And fast forward to 2020, you see that because of the pandemic, we have a user that is anywhere, any location, whether physical or logical. We have a server that has dissolved into a workload or into a container image, etc. Much more ephemeral workloads to protect, etc. So I think that in hindsight, this decision was very righteous. And we see now a lot of the vendors in that space who have resisted that move actually adopted, because of course when we want to build a platform that is scalable and that can protect any user anywhere in a very fast manner using cloud analytics and a cloud first approach in building and evolving the platform is a must. Thank you.
Interesting. But like, so do you believe like the region is now ready for endpoint security in the cloud? How have you been seeing the adoption recently?
Yes, excellent question as well. I think the region in general, the UAE, the Saudi Arabia, etc., they are not against using cloud technologies per se, because we know that the cloud evolution is here to stay. They have their own concerns of what type of data or metadata or private information are we sharing with the cloud, and how are we protecting them. And I think vendors who can prove that they are preserving the privacy and the local regulation for their clients are gaining their fair share of business, which is very applicable to CrowdStrike as well. So we've seen adoption rates from government entities, from local banking sector, from different various parts of the economy go for cloud-based technologies that are not just CrowdStrike, many other providers as well, as long as we can ensure that we're preserving customer data integrity and data privacy. We can do business with any entity in the region.
Right. That's very interesting to know. And as I believe, like it's always when it comes to cybersecurity, visibility becomes a very, very important aspect. And like I always say, like if you can't see, how will you secure that? And I think always people have this concern around, oh, like we're not sure what you're doing with our data, what you're doing with our information. So my question next is to Moat from Fortinet. Is in your presentation, you did speak about how secure SD-WAN, it also helps in providing visibility. So could you shed some more light on that?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Fortinet is a security company, and for sure, we believe that providing the right amount of visibility to the customers is so important so that they can protect their workloads, their users, and their applications. So just to break down the question in two parts, we provide comprehensive visibility for, first of all, to the SOC team, and then we provide also visibility for the NOC team, because at the end, SD-WAN is a networking solution as well. It connects the WANs together. So just to make it easier to break my answer based on the visibility on what the network or the NOC team needs to see and what kind of visibility is interested for the SOC teams. So first of all, for the NOC team, of course, they want to see physical and the logical topology of the entire infrastructure, and they want to gain this visibility automatically without doing too much configuration for it. And then they also want to maybe know where the users, where the devices are exactly being connected. And then for the SD part, they also want to see the link qualities in terms of jitter, in terms of loss, in terms of delay as well, and the bandwidth utilization on their links. So this is like kind of some of the visibility that we can offer to the NOC team. And then for the SOC team also, they can have like visibility for the entire security events that they have. For example, if there's some compromised hosts, maybe in one of the branches, they can all see that as well. Plus the end-to-end visibility for the malwares and the threats that could be affecting the environment. So one other also important kind of visibility that we offer to the SOC team is the ability to see the vulnerabilities which are on the endpoint. So whether it was an operating system running on a Linux or on a laptop or even on any IoT device. So having the ability to see all these kind of security vulnerabilities or events, plus the views that the NOC team is interested to see from a single pane of management, this is possible. And of course, I mentioned in during my presentation that we can recognize more than 5,000 different applications on the FortiGate, so that now you can apply your security policies on an application level, or even do the SD-WAN routing based on each application separately. So this is just a quick answer to some of the visibility types that we can offer.
No worries. No, that's really interesting. And it also like brings me here that we are all talking about the cloud, doing things on the cloud, protecting things. It's everything is talking about software and cloud. And there I go back to Nikolai's slide when he asked the question about what if the pandemic happened 20 years ago. And it is actually like, if we just pause and think like, okay, there was a time that is pre-YouTube time. I think it's very difficult to even imagine that time. Pre-social media, pre-YouTube, I don't think we'll be able to do this kind of an event in those days. I mean, like the famous meme goes, like if the COVID happened at that time, we'll all be playing Snake on our little mobile phones. So Nikolai, my next question is to you. So, like from the time of playing Snake on mobile phones to all the way now, when we're talking of SASE, we're talking of cloud security. I mean, do you think like the market and in this region, I mean, we are ready for SASE, for cloud security? And how do you see, or what is your view of the market currently?
I think we're all ready for utilizing some of the benefit that comes from the cloud. And there's a number of reasons for it. First of all, the last year showed us the dependency we have on these environments, right? I also think that to some extent, the cloud can be one of the ways that we're going to be able to create even more efficiency out of our organizations. And that, I think, is going to be extremely important in the coming years. You know, I think if we look back on the last year and COVID-19, the pandemic and all of these things, all of us actually, I think we've been relatively fortunate. If you look at our industry, security as an example, right, we haven't been impacted that much, but there's a lot of industries around us that have been impacted. And that's why I think that doing stuff smarter is going to be extremely important for a lot of clients in the future. So that part of it is very important. I think SASE as an example, where we move security capabilities into a cloud-delivered format or into the edge of the service provider infrastructure, is also extremely important. And there's a number of reasons for it. First of all, the footprint required to do good security decisions is becoming bigger and bigger. You know, machine learning, AI as an example, right, is two pieces of technology that requires a lot of compute and a lot of capabilities, which can be extremely challenging to do for an enterprise organization, specifically as they need to distribute this across all sorts of different kind of environments, whether it's the normal standard enterprise headquarter to the normal data center to the cloud data center and these things. And all of these changes require us to rethink how we do stuff. And that's where SASE comes in and actually lends us a helping hand.
Interesting. You mentioned about AI and machine learning. This is definitely like one of the, I mean, it has always been one of the favorite buzzwords for, I think, multiple industries like cybersecurity being no exception. So here I want to ask Rabi. So obviously when we talk of AI and machine learning, so it's not only the vendors and providers like us who are using AI, but the same is being done by the threat actors. So they're going to be leveraging this to have smarter attacks, bigger attacks. So how do organizations actually keep pace? And what do you suggest and what advice would you give to them?
Spot on question, Sumaya. I'm going to call you by your Arabic version of the name, Sumaya. So it's a good question. Yes, attackers, what they are doing, and we're all seeing that they are bypassing the protection layers, these are sophisticated, determined attackers who are using AI and machine learning to their benefit as well. And once they bypass those protections layer, they are inside the network with valid credentials. And if you are, and they use new tools and even zero-day malwares. And if you are still using a signature-based detection to find out these threats, you're not going to make it. You're not going to detect that. We need to look at behaviors. Okay, we need actually to do four things. One, we need to look at behaviors, because behaviors don't change over time, right? Attackers will still execute their kill chain by first compromising a device or a supply chain. Second thing they're going to do, they're going to establish their command and control to their tunnel to their command and control center. Then they will do recon, lateral movements, privilege escalation, and exfiltrations. So these behaviors don't change much over time. That's why it's important to look at behaviors. The second thing is that we need to use AI and machine learning to our advantage. And AI and machine learning will help us look at the kill chain over a very long period of time, connect the dots, detect the threat by looking at different events, and prioritize those as well. And the third thing you need to do, you need to look at the entire attack surface, on-prem, cloud, data center, IoT, And the fourth thing you need to do also is to have the full visibility. So yes, you need to look at what's happening inside the buildings with the EDR, and also you need to look at what's happening on the roads and the communication between those buildings with the NDR, right? So you need to have both the NDR and the EDR. And of course, there will be the SIM UBA to correlate the logs in between. So that's the SOC 3 app. So 4 things: behaviors, full attack surface, machine learning AI, and the full visibility. And that.
Interesting. So now we'll take up a question from the audience. So I'll read out the question. Nikolai, maybe you can set the first answer, and then we will take anything that others have to say. So the question is, how do you handle, or what protection you have put in place to protect our clients for a potential supply chain attack? As nowadays the attackers are more focused on infecting the supplier rather than the client itself to infiltrate client cloud and on-premise services.
Yes, you're absolutely right. We've seen a number of examples in the last couple of actually, if I look at the last 6 months, right, from let's call it from the narrative of cybersecurity, the big story that we're all living through. I think the 2 main chapters in the last 6 months has actually been around supply chain or suppliers, right? Obviously, SolarWinds is one of the ones that we can talk about. But if you also see in the last, just a month ago, we had a very large vulnerability on Microsoft Exchange. And I'm not saying that it was Microsoft that was hacked, right? That's not the case. But it was their product which was impacting clients that was running Exchange on-prem. And if customers were not able to patch this in the right way, they would be vulnerable to these things. So I think supply chain management is going to be a more and more important question moving forward. We already have clients who's monitoring us because we're part of their supply chain, and of course we're happy to work with them on explaining how we do security and how we ensure that hopefully we would not be part of an attack on their environment. But everyone needs to be aware of this, and everyone needs to have a policy around how do they deal with supply chain. Specifically, many of the vendors that are here today, they have cloud-based services, and depending on which kind of data you require to get into those services, they need to be responsible for that data, and that's something you need to be aware about. So the whole industry needs to understand that we're part of a problem that needs to be handled.
Interesting. We have another question. So suppose the environment is compromised. How does HelpEG manage? What is the response plan to secure the rest of the network? Is there controls to isolate the attacks?
So if you allow me to take this question. So I agree totally with Nikolai. We've seen some of the most sophisticated and state-led cyber attacks that were targeting global companies and large enterprises. Now, we will all of us have to accept it that sooner or later an attack is going to be successful on us. So that is why we need to always make it much more difficult for the attackers to gain the access level once the breach is successful. And one of the perfect ways that all of us know, and we always keep recommending it, is having zero trust network access as well as segmentation in order to minimize the damage that can be caused whenever one of the attacks is successful. So this is what I'm thinking of.
Thank you, Muad. So Nikolai, would you like to add anything? Because I believe the question has HelpEG in it too. So what is your recommendation to isolate attacks for it doesn't spread throughout?
There's many ways you can do it, right? But really it's about understanding access control between systems. So understanding what's allowed to communicate where, and that can be done under network control, but it can also be done in privileges in the applications. I honestly think that the doors that we have in infrastructures and in applications, they're way too big and way too open sometimes, and it's really important that we make sure that we limit the capabilities that a system have in the network, specifically because as we plug more and more devices into our infrastructure, right, this problem is just going to be bigger and bigger.
Interesting. So like there's a lot of talking about zero trust, as I see from both Moat's and Nikolai's answer. So on the one side, we are talking about reducing the trust, making it zero trust. On the other side, we're also talking about trusting the AI and machine learning algorithms and all the stuff fun that's happening there. So my question is to Roland. So AI-powered endpoint security, like what is your view on that? Like how is that adding this extra value to the customers, and how does it like help them better?
Okay, thank you for this question. Before I answer it, I just wanted to add one small comment to Nikolai and Muad. We should focus on network, we should focus on endpoints, but we should also focus on identity stores, in my opinion, if we want to really have a shot at limiting the scope of these like supply chain attacks. As long as we also apply strong controls on identity stores and on privileges, we will also improve our chances of limiting the scope of these attacks. Now, when it comes to your question related to AI, I think it's part of normal evolution. So signature-based, scan-based solutions that incur a lot of friction obviously don't work. You see a ransomware very successful, and in 99% of the cases, customers are using a traditional antivirus. I haven't seen a scenario where the customer didn't have an AV. Today's workloads are also much more ephemeral in nature, containers replacing VMs and servers. And I think AI wasn't born last year. AI on endpoint and machine learning on endpoint, as well as on network, companies like Vectra as well doing the same in that space. They've been evolving for more than 7 or 8 years. So I believe that at this stage, customers can, let's say, upgrade their trust and believe that the traditional rule-based or signature-based approach to cybersecurity is fundamentally broken. So we can offload a lot of the compute tasks to smarter brains, cloud engines, etc., that leverage AI and machine learning, not from a buzzword perspective, but actually can show how without a signature-based engine, we can block a modern attack. So in a nutshell, I think it's a natural evolution that we're all following when it comes to adopting AI in cybersecurity.
Interesting. Thank you, Roland. So obviously, like as the theme of our event has been like perimeter security in a perimeterless era, my next question is to Jamie. So now that the perimeters are blurry or disappearing or whatever you say, how do you see the concept of visibility beyond the perimeter changing? And what is your take on that?
Thanks, Ami, and great question. And I think we got to appreciate the current context, right? So COVID forced almost every organization to get better at working remotely and in more distributed ways. And I think that's a trend that's clearly not going away anytime soon. But I think with that, we've seen a huge amount of focus on all these new platforms, all these new services, whether that is online conference platforms, such as what we're on right now, whether that is on virtual events, new productivity platforms, remote working, collaboration, etc. So we really are now working within that kind of that wider ecosystem, if you like. It's not just that the security team hands an employee a laptop and able to really configure that just how they want, know all of the different applications that they're going to be using, because we're now sharing data, we're now collaborating on all these new platforms as well. I think in that context, there are really kind of three things for security teams to kind of bear in mind. I think first is making sure that security is baked into all of those agreements, right? That we're going to be working with a lot of third parties. That's great. It can really help us move our business on. But we also want to make sure that security is part of that conversation. We're not just looking at cost or efficiency of a platform, but security is really part of the conversation and has that profile as well. I think maybe the most critical point, though, is that it really points to me to a widening purview of the cybersecurity team. So if you take something like social media, for example, that was maybe previously seen as a marketing issue, didn't really have any overlap with security. But actually now we're seeing that, social media, really important part of an organization's brand. If a threat is able to gain access to, social media account, can really hamper an organization's reputation. So what that means is that security teams are going to really need to adopt a collaborative approach and working across an organization. So whether that is around social media accounts, whether that is data shared with third parties, virtual conference providers, etc., security needs to make sure that they're in the room, that they're able to, look at all of that. And then I think finally, it's maybe also worth looking at this perimeterless era in two ways. I think first of all, we of course want to look at the threat surface. So if we're using all these new areas, if we're going to the cloud, we're increasing our threat surface. Threat actors can target an increasing number of different platforms. But I think the other part of this is the exposure surface. So a lot of this will be inadvertent. People will start using a cloud. They might think that cloud is automatically configured to be private, but actually it could be public, right? So thinking about that, not just the threats, but the inadvertent exposure, that's really important. And it's really there that threat intelligence can do both. On the threat surface, we want to understand, well, who's targeting the clouds that we're using? What are the trends? What are the threat trends? What can we do to mitigate those sort of threats that we're seeing in the wild? But then we can also do, say, digital threat monitoring, looking beyond our perimeter to see how our data is exposed. Is it exposed in negative ways? And threat intelligence can really provide insight towards both the threats, but then the exposure. And I think when you're looking at both, you're really well set up for success.
Interesting. So now that when you talk about looking beyond the perimeter, for example, and our dependence on this cloud-based apps is increasing so much. So do you see a changing dynamics between organizations and cloud providers?
Yeah, I mean, another great question. And I think it's something that's been really interesting over the last few years, because if we zoom back a couple of years ago, maybe there was that sense that organizations start using the cloud and they're almost outsourcing their security or outsourcing their risk. It's now AWS's problem or, Office, etc. It's kind of, we've outsourced it. Someone else is managing our security for us because they're the ones that are protecting the cloud. But actually, let's look at how organizations and their cloud data is being exploited, how it is being obtained. And a lot of that is actually down to organizations themselves. It will be through stolen credentials, for instance, maybe gathered via phishing. It might be due to clouds being misconfigured. It could be down to vulnerable applications. So, we see threats gaining access to AWS via first gaining access to an organization's GitHub, for instance, and using that access via GitHub. So critically, a lot of this isn't necessarily threats directly targeting cloud providers, but actually exploiting organizations themselves. So what that means, I think, is rather than seeing this as something where organizations outsourcing risk, outsourcing security, they really still need to take a lot of ownership, whether that is around access controls, around configuration, etc. So really taking that ownership over security is really vital. And again, it's something threat intelligence can be really helpful. We recently did a series looking at how threat actors went after cloud providers, provided a lot of mitigation steps, for instance. And we want to know, what threats are targeting the cloud providers we're using. Marlon asked a really great question earlier about targeting, through the supply chain and the likes of cloud. And that can be a brilliant initial access vector, but also, threat intelligence can provide us that defense in depth, not only understanding initial access, but how actors are, say, gaining privileges, how they're moving around laterally, how they're using that initial access from cloud to do other things. So I think that's where understanding of the threat across the life cycle can be really important. But I think bottom line, organizations have to take that ownership. They have to own and manage the risks associated with cloud security rather than thinking it's outsourced.
So coming from taking that ownership, so my next question is to Anderson in this way. So let's say we are ready to take the ownership and I want to test my cloud provider. Is that a possibility?
Yes, of course. Thank you for the question. It's really interesting because with all these new trends, it's clear something that we start to ask ourselves how we keep tracking all these new trends, right? And of course, aside of visibility portfolio that we have with Keysight, Keysight is also a test company, right? So we have a long-term and a long history of doing testing. One of the solutions that we have presented today, that it was Hawkeye, it was actually designed to provide a full flexibility with deploying, right? So it's aiming to provide proactive testing over different technologies. It includes also cloud providers as well, right? And the idea of the Hawkeye is especially to be covering gaps of monitoring, especially if it is new trends. It's not only about cloud, right? The emerging new technologies that it's become really common, like SD-WAN, edge, networking, IoT, OT. There are many different new trends, and to keep monitoring all these new trends is really difficult and can be really that can bring a very big cost to your monitoring scenario, right? And talking especially about cloud, it can be even more difficult because the cloud can be very, very elastic, and it can have a very big scalability in your network. So it's really difficult to keep tracking that. And of course, you need to aim for solutions that can be deployed and can be very flexible in different new technology, following these new trends, and can be really scalable. Like, for instance, the Hawkeye can reach up to thousands and thousands of endpoints that you can deploy anywhere, right? And it's a solution that will be very, let's say, vendor agnostic, right? So it doesn't need to be designed to deploy in a specific cloud provider or a specific vendor. All that you need is some kind of instance running a simple Linux, or you can run this on Docker or Kubernetes environment, whatever, right? You need to be flexible. You need to follow these new trends. You need to be covering these new technologies to guarantee your connectivity and your performance.
Interesting. Thank you so much, Anderson. So I think in the respect of time, I'll just have one last question, again, in respect of our theme. So perimeterless era, and considering the perimeter security, there's so many things to think of. Nicola, I have this question for you. So if you had to say, what is it like? It can be one thing, two things, three things, but what is it that it will actually differentiate organizations in how they behave in dealing with this big change to rethinking cybersecurity, and which will put them ahead of others?
I think first of all, to understand that there is a big change to how we think about security in this new paradigm, right? So if you just go into this thinking that your existing approach is okay to deal with that, I think you've probably already lost out a little bit because there is fundamental changes to this, right? So yeah, understand that there is a reassessment of how you do stuff that's required moving forward. And I think also understand that that this is not just something we're talking about a short period of time, right? You're going to never ever have the same amount of people in the office again, because it's been proven that we can work in this way, and that means that some of the people who's making decisions higher up in organizations, they're rethinking how we're going to be working in the future. So it's simply, this is a permanent situation that will stay forever.
Okay. So while I'm a little sad by the fact that Nikolai just said that it's going to be a permanent situation, I'll ignore that part. But yeah, like I think jokes apart, I think all of us have made peace with the fact that no matter what changes, maybe COVID goes away, fingers crossed, the things are never going to go back. Yes, please.
What I mean is, it's not going to be that we will be stuck at home forever, right? But I think it's going to be a question of us having a task in the office in order for us to necessarily go in the office, right? So I think the way that we're thinking about going to the office is going to be very different in the future, right?
Totally. So yeah, that's exactly. So I think no matter what happens, whether we are working from our log homes in lockdown, or we are working from the fanciest coffee shops out there, or maybe we actually go up to where Anderson or Jamie are and actually be able to say hi to them. So no matter what happens and what changes, the fact that cybersecurity needs to be rethought is a reality. You have to, like Nikolai just said, we have to rethink, we have to redefine. Actually, it's like they always say, never reinvent the wheel, but I think it's about redefining and rethinking how we do things around cybersecurity. We have had a great day, and if you see the chat button, so you have, we have pasted for you guys a survey link that you can fill it in. You'll be receiving a certificate after completion. And also, more than that, we will really love to understand your pain points and how we can help you further. And thanks a lot for attending today's Security Spotlight Forum. Any questions for Help AG or any of our partners, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Please email us. If you want to remember the simplest email, it's marketing@helpag.com. But if you visit all the email addresses are available, just reach out to us and we'll make sure we'll get on a call and find out the best solutions and best services. And like we always said, things are changing, but let's not think much about the past, what's not right, what's not correct, but let's think forward. Think Help AG. Thank you all for a great session and a great event. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Soumya.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.